Moss nodded. Taylor fell asleep with him. As the old man strode along, there was a series of loads, and they were all going to the surface. Blind cars clanking with ore trucks up the ramp, disappearing through the strapped trap above them. Taylor watched the cars, heavy with tubular machinery of some sort, weapons new to him. Workers were everywhere, in the dark gray uniforms of the labor corps, loading, lifting, shooting back and forth, and the stage was deafening with noise. "We'll go up that way," Moss said, "where we can talk. This is no place to give you any details." So they took an escalator up. The commercial lift fell behind them, and with it most of the crashing and booming. Soon they emerged on an observation platform, suspended on the side with tube, in the vast tunnel leading to the surface, not more than a half-mile above them now. "My God," Taylor said, looking down the tube involuntarily. "It's a long way down." Moss laughed. "Well, then don't look." They opened a door, entered an office. Behind the desk, an officer was sitting, an officer of internal security. He looked up. "I'll be right with you, Moss." He gazed at Taylor, studying him. "You're a little ahead of time." "This is Commander Franks," Moss said. "He was the first to make the discovery. I was notified last night." And he tapped a parcel he carried. "I was let in because of this." Frank frowned, stood up. "Gentlemen, we're going up to the first stage. We could discuss it there." "First stage?" Taylor repeated it nervously. The three of them went down, a side passage, to a small lift. "I've never been up there. Is it all right? It's not radioactive, is it?" "Yeah, you're like everyone else. No radiation leaks down to the first stage. There's lead and rocks, and what comes down the tube is bathed." "What's the nature of the problem, sir?" Taylor asked. "I'd like to know something about it. In a moment." They entered the lift and ascended. When they stepped out, they were in a hall of soldiers, weapons, and uniforms everywhere. Taylor blinked in surprise. So this was the first stage, the closest undersurface level to the top. And after this stage, there was only rock, lead and rock, and the great tubes leading up like burrows of earthworms. Lead and rock, and above that, where the tubes opened, the great expanse that no living being had seen for 8 years. The vast, endless ruin that had once been man's home, the place where he had lived, but that was 8 years ago. Now, the surface with a lethal desert of slag and rolling clouds. Endless clouds drifted back and forth, blotted out by a red sun. And occasionally something metallic stirred, moving through the remains of a city, threading its way across the tortured terrain of the countryside. It was called a leady, a surface robot, immune to radiation, constructed from feverish haste in the last months before the Cold War became literally hot. Leddies, crawling along the ground, moving over the oceans or through the skies in slender blackened craft. Creatures that could exist where no life could remain. Metal and plastic figures that waged a war man had conceived, but which he could not fight himself. Human beings had invented war, invented and manufactured the weapons, even invented the players, the fighters, and the actors of the war. But they themselves could not venture forth, could not wage it themselves. In all the world, Russia, Europe, America, Africa, no living human being remained. They were under the surface, in the deep shelters that had been carefully planned and built, even as the first bombs began to fall. It was a brilliant idea, and the only idea that could have worked. Up above on the ruin-blasted surface of what had once been a living planet, The leady crawled, scurried, and fought man's war. And undersurface, in the depths of the planet, human beings toiled endlessly to produce the weapons to continue the fight, month by month, year by year. First stage, Taylor said. Strange ache went through him. We're almost to the surface, but not quite, Moss said. Franks led them to the soldiers, over to one side near the lip tube. In a moment, a lift will bring something down to us from the surface. You see, Taylor? Every once in a while, security examines and interrogates a surface leady, one that has been above for a time, to find out certain things. A vid call is sent up, contact is made with the field of headquarters. We need this direct interview. We can't depend on vid-screen contact alone. The leadies are doing a good job, but we want to make certain that everything is going the way we want it. Frank faced Taylor, and Moss continued. The lift will bring down a leady from the surface, one of the A-class leadies. There's an examination chamber in the next room, with a lead wall in the center, so the interviewing officer won't be exposed to the radiation. We find the easier than bathing the leady, of course. That'd be going right back up. It has a job to get back to, after all. 2 days ago, an A-class leady was brought down and interrogated. I conducted the session myself. We were interested in new weapons the Soviets had been using. An automatic mine that pursues anything that moves. Military had sent instructions up to that mine, and be observed and reported on in detail. This A-class leady was brought down with information. We learned a few facts from it, obtained the usual roll of film and reports, and then sent it back up. It's going out of the chamber, back to the lift, when a curious thing happened. At the time, I thought. And he broke off. A red light was flashing. That lift is coming. He nodded to the soldiers. Let's enter the chamber. Letty will be along in a moment. An A-class Letty? I've seen them on the show screens making their reports. It's quite an experience. They're almost human. They entered the chamber and seated themselves behind the lead wall. After a time, a signal was flashed, and Franks made a motion with his hands. The door beyond the wall opened, and Taylor peered through his view slot. He saw something advancing slowly, a slender metallic figure moving on a tread, its arm grips at rest by its side, and the figure halted and seen the lead wall, and it stood waiting. We're interested in learning a little something. Now, before I question you, do you have anything to report on surface conditions? The leady answered in an atomic, toneless voice. No. The war continues. We are a little short of fast pursuit craft. The single seat, we could use some of those. That's all been noted. What I want to ask you is this. Our contact with you has been through vid screen only. We must rely on indirect evidence, since none of us goes above. We can only infer what's going on. We never see anything ourselves. We have to take it all secondhand. Some top leaders are beginning to think there's too much room for error. Error? The leady asked. In what way? Our reports are checked carefully before they're sent down. We maintain constant contact with the U, and everything of value is reported. Any new weapon which the enemy is seen to employ. I realize that. Frank grunted. looked at the people behind him with a squint. Or perhaps we should see it all for ourselves. Is it possible there might be a large enough radiation-free area for a human party to ascend to the surface? If a few of us were to come up in lead-lined suits, would we be able to survive long enough to observe conditions? Just watch things?
I doubt it. You can check air samples, of course, and decide for yourself. But in the 8 years since you left, things have continually worsened. You cannot have any real idea of conditions up there. It has become difficult for any moving object to survive for long. There are many kinds of projectiles sensitive to movement. The new mine not only reacts to motion, but continues to pursue the object indefinitely until it finally reaches it. And the radiation is everywhere.
I see. Frank turned to Moss with his eyes narrowing. Well, that was what I wanted to know. You may go. The machine moved back to its exit. It paused.
Each month, the amount of lethal particles in the atmosphere increases. The tempo of the war is...
I understand. And Franks rose. He held out his hand and Moss passed him the package. One thing before you leave. I want you to examine a new type of metal shield material. I'll pass you a sample with a tong. Franks put the package in the tooth grip and revolved the tong so that he held the other end. The package swung down to the leady, which took it. And they watched it unwrap the package and take the metal plate in its hands. And the leady turned the metal over and over. And suddenly it became rigid. All right, Frank said. He put his shoulder against the wall, and a section slid aside. Taylor gasped. Franks and Moss were hurrying up to the leady. Good God! It's radioactive! The leady stood unmoving, still holding the metal. And the soldiers appeared in the chamber, and they surrounded the leady and ran a counter across it carefully. Okay, sir, said one of them to Franks. It's as cold as a long winter evening. Good. I was sure. I didn't want to take any chances. Moss said to Taylor, You see, this leady isn't all hot air. It came directly from the surface, without even being bathed. But what does it mean? Maybe an accident, Frank said. There's always the possibility that a given object might escape being exposed above. But this is the second time it's happened that we know of, and there may be others. Second time. The previous interview was when we noticed it. Letty was not hot. It was cold, too, just like this one. Moss took the metal plate from the Letty's hand, and he pressed the surface carefully and returned it to the stiff, unprotesting finger. We shorted it out with this, so we could get it close enough for a thorough check. It'll come on back in a second now. We had better get behind the wall again. They walked back, and the lead wall swung closed behind them, and the soldiers left the chamber. 2 periods from now, an initial investigation party will be ready to go to the surface. We're going up to the tube, in suits, all the way to the top. The first human party to leave undersurface in 8 years. May mean nothing. I doubt it. Something's going on. Something strange. The Lettys told us life could exist above without being masked and roasted. The story doesn't fit. Taylor nodded. He stared through the peep slot at the immobile metal figure. Already the leady was beginning to stir. It was bent in several places, dented and twisted, and its finish was blackened and charred. It was a leady that had been up there a long time. It had seen war and destruction, ruin so vast that no human being could imagine the extent. It had crawled and slunk in a world of radiation and death, a world where no life could exist. And Taylor had touched it. "You're going with us," Frank said suddenly. "I want you along. You know, I think the three of us should go." That night, his wife Mary faced him with a sick and frightened expression.
"I know it. You're going surface side, aren't you?"
She followed him into the kitchen. Taylor sat down, looking away from her. It's a classified project. I can't tell you anything about it."
"You don't have to tell me, I know. I knew at the moment you came in. There was something on your face. Something I haven't seen there for a long, long time. It was an old look."
She came forward to him.
"But how could they send you to the surface?"
She took his face in her shaking hands, making him look at her. There was a strange hunger in her eyes.
"Nobody can live up there. Look at this."
She grabbed a newspaper and held it in front of him.
"Look at this photograph. America, Europe, Asia, Africa. Nothing but ruins. We've seen it every day on the show screens, all destroyed, all poisoned. And they're sending you up. Why? No living thing can get up there. Not even a weed or grass. We've wrecked the surface."
Taylor stood up. "It's an order. I know nothing about it. I was told to report to a joint scout party. That's all I know." He stood up for a long time, staring ahead. Slowly, he reached for the newspaper and held it up to the light. "It looks real. Ruins, deadness, slag. It's convincing. All the reports, photography, films, even air samples. Yeah, we haven't seen it for ourselves. Not even after the first months."
"What are you talking about?"
"Nothing." He put the paper down. "I'm leaving early, after the next sleep period. Let's tune in." Mary turned away, face hard and harsh.
"Do what you want. We might as well just all go up and all get killed at once instead of dying slowly down here like vermin in the ground."
He had not realized how resentful she was. How about the workers toiling in the factory day and night endlessly? The pale, stooped men and women plodding back and forth to work, blinking in the colorless light, eating synthetics. You shouldn't be so bitter.
I'm bitter because I know you'll never come back. I'll never see you again once you go up there.
He was shocked. How can you say a thing like that? And she didn't answer. He awakened to the public newscaster screeching in his ear, shouting outside the building. "Special bulletin! Surface forces report enormous Soviet attack with new weapon. Retreat of key group. All work units report to factories at once." Taylor blinked, rubbing his eyes. He jumped out of bed and hurried to the vid phone. A moment later, he was put up to Moss. "Listen, what about the new attack? Is the project off?" And he could see Moss's desk covered with reports and papers.
"No. We're going right ahead. Get over here at once. But don't argue with me."
Moss held up a handful of surface bulletins, crumpling savagely.
"This is all false. Come on."
And he broke off. Taylor dressed furiously, his mind in a daze. Half an hour later, he leaped from a fast car and hurried up the stairs into the synthetic building. The corridors were full of men and women rushing in every direction, and he entered Moss's office. "There you are. Franks is waiting for us at the ongoing station." They went in a security car. The sirens were screaming. Workers scattered out of their way. "What about the attack?" Taylor said. Moss braced his shoulders. "We're certain that we've forced their hand. We've brought the issue to a head." They pulled up at the station link of the tube and linked out. A moment later, they were moving up at high speed toward the first stage. They emerged into a bewildering scene of activity. Soldiers were fastening on lead suits, talking excitedly to each other, shouting back and forth. Guns were being given out, instructions passed. Taylor studied one of the soldiers. He was armed with the dreaded Bender pistol, a new snub-nosed hand weapon that was just beginning to come from the assembly line. Some of the soldiers looked a little frightened. "I hope we're not making a mistake," Moss said. "Here's the program. The three of us were going up first, alone. The soldiers will follow in 15 minutes. What are we going to tell the leadys?" Taylor worriedly asked. "We'll have to tell them something. We want to observe the new Soviet attack. That's what we'll say. Since it seems to be so serious, we should be there in person to witness it." "And then what?" "Well, that'll be up to them, I guess. We should go." In a small car, they went swiftly to the tube, carried by anti-gravity beams from below. Taylor glanced down from the first from time to time. It was a long way back and getting longer with each moment. He sweated nervously inside his suit, gripping his Bender pistol with an expert finger. Why had they chosen him? Chance, pure chance? Moss had asked him to come along as a department member. Then Franks had picked him out of the spur of the moment. And now they were rushing toward the surface faster and faster. A deep fear, instilled in him for 8 years, throbbed in his mind. Radiation, certain death, a world blasted and lethal. But up and up the car went. Taylor gripped the sides and closed his eyes. And each moment they were closer, the first living creatures to go above the first stage of the tube past the lead and rock up to the surface. And the phobic horror shook him in waves. It was death. They all knew that. Hadn't they seen it in the films 1,000 times? The city, sleep coming down, the rolling clouds. Won't be much longer. We're almost there. The surface tower is not expecting us. I gave orders that no signal was to be sent. The car shot up, rushing furiously. Taylor's head spun. He hung on, his eyes shut, up and up. The car stopped, and he opened his eyes. They were in a vast room, fluorescent lit, a cavern filled with equipment and machinery, endless mounds of material piled in row after row. Among the stacks, leadys were working silently, pushing trucks and handcarts. Leadys. They really rely on the surface here. The leadys were going back and forth with equipment moving. Vast stores of guns and spare parts, ammunition, supplies that had been brought to the surface. And this was the receiving station for only one tube. There were many others scattered throughout the continent. Taylor looked nervously around him. They were really there, above ground, on the surface. This was where the war was. Come on. A B-class guard is coming our way. They stepped out of the car. Letty was approaching them rapidly. He coasted up in front and then stopped, scanning them with hand weapon raised. This is security, Frank said. I have an A-class sent to me at once. You hear? The leady hesitated. Other B-class guards were coming, scooting across the floor, alerted, alarmed. Moss peered around him. Obey! You've been ordered. And the leady moved uncertainly away. At the end of the building, a door slid back. 2 A-class leadys appeared, coming slowly toward them. Each had a green stripe across its front. From the Surface Council, Frank said. This is above ground, all right. Get set. And the 2 leadys approached warily, without speaking. They stopped close by the men, looking them up and down. I'm Franks, of security. We come from undersurface. You understand? In order to... Then, one of the leadys interrupted him coldly.
This is incredible. You know you can't live up here. The whole surface is lethal to you. You can't possibly remain on the surface, sir.
These suits will protect us. In any case, it's not your responsibility. What I want is an immediate council meeting, so I can acquaint myself with conditions, the situation up here. Can that be arranged?
You human beings can't survive up here. And the new Soviet attack is deserting the area. You are in considerable danger.
We know that. Please, assemble the council. Franks looked around him in the vast room lit by recessed lamps in the ceiling. An uncertain quality came into his voice. Is it night or day now?
Night. Dawn is coming in about 2 hours.
Franks nodded. We'll remain at least 2 hours then. As a concession to our sentimentality, would you please show us some place where we can observe the sun as it comes up? We would appreciate it. A stir went through the leadys.
It is an unpleasant sight. You've seen the photographs. You know what you'll witness. Clouds of drifting particles blot out the light. Slag leaps here and there. The whole land is destroyed. For you it will be a staggering sight, much worse than a picture or film can convey.
However it may be, we'll stay long enough to see it. Will you give the order to the council?
Come this way.
Reluctantly, the 2 leadys coasted toward the wall of the warehouse. The 3 men trudged after them, their heavy shoes ringing against the concrete. And at the wall, the 2 leadys paused.
This is the entrance to the council chamber. There are windows in the chamber room, but it is still dark outside, of course. You'll see nothing right now, but in 2 hours,
open the door, Frank said. The door slid back. They went slowly inside. The room was small, a neat room with a round table in the center, chairs ringing it. The 3 of them sat down silently, and the 2 leadys followed after them, taking their place.
The other council members are on their way. They have already been notified and are coming as quickly as they can. Again, I urge you to go back down. There is no way you can meet the conditions up here. Even we survive with some trouble ourselves. How can you expect to do it?
The leader approached Franks.
This astonishes and perplexes us. Of course, we must do what you tell us, but allow me to point out that if you remain here...
We know. However, we intend to remain. At least until sunrise.
If you insist.
There was silence. The leadys seemed to be conferring with each other, although the 3 men heard no sound.
For your own good, you must go back down. We have discussed this, and it seems to us that you are doing the wrong thing for your own good.
We are human beings. Do you understand? We're men, not machines.
That is precisely why you must go back. This room is radioactive. The surface area all are. We calculate that your suits will not protect you from over 50 more minutes. Therefore,
the leadys moved abruptly toward the men, wheeling in a circle, forming a solid row. The men stood up, Taylor reaching awkwardly for his weapon, his fingers numb and stupid. The men stood facing the silent metal figures.
We must insist. We must take you back to the tube and send you down on the next car. I am sorry, but it is necessary.
What do we do? Moss said, nervously. He touched his gun.
Shall we blast them?
Frank shook his head. All right. We'll go back. He moved toward the door, motioning Taylor and Moss to follow him. They looked at him in surprise, but they came with him. The leadys followed them out into the great warehouse. Slowly they moved toward the tube entrance, none of them speaking. At the lip, Frank turned. We're going back, as we have no choice. There are 3 of us and about a dozen of you. However, here comes the car, Taylor said. It was a grating sound from tube. D-class leadys moved toward the edge to receive it.
I am sorry, but it is for your protection. We are watching over you, literally. You must stay below and let us conduct our war. In a sense, it has come to be our war. We must fight it as we see fit.
The car rose to the surface. 12 soldiers, armed with Bender pistols, stepped from it and surrounded the 3 men. Moss breathed a sigh of relief.
This does change things. It came off just right.
The leader moved back, away from the soldiers. It studied them intently, glancing from one to the next, apparently trying to make up its mind. At last it made a sign to the other leadys. They coasted aside. A corridor was opened up toward the warehouse.
Even now, we could send you back by force, but it is evident that this is not really an observation party at all. These soldiers show that you have much more in mind. This was all carefully prepared.
Very carefully, Frank said. They closed in.
How much more we can only guess. I must admit, we were taken unprepared. We failed utterly to meet the situation. Now force would be absurd, as neither side can afford to injure the other. We because of the restrictions placed on us regarding human life, you because the war demands.
The soldiers fired, quick and in fright. Most dropped to one knee, firing up. The leader dissolved in a cloud of particles. On all sides, D-, B- class leadys were rushing up, some with weapons, some with metal staffs. The room was in confusion. Off in the distance, a siren was screaming. Frank and Taylor were cut off from the others, separated from the soldiers by a wall of metal bodies. They can't fire back, Frank said. It's just a bluff. They've tried to bluff us all the ways they can. They can only try to frighten us. Remember that. And they went on firing, and leady after leady vanished. The room reeked with the smell of burning metal, the stink of fused plastic and steel. And Taylor had knocked down. He was staggering to his gun, reaching wildly among metal legs, groping frantically to find it. His fingers strained. A handle swam in front of him. And suddenly, something came down on his arm. A metal foot. He cried out. Then it was over. The leadys were moving away, gathering together off to one side. Only 4 of the Surface Council remained. The others were radioactive particles in the air. D-class leadys were always restoring order, gathering up partly destroyed metal figures and bits removing them. Franks breathed a shuddering sigh. "All right. You can take us back to the windows. It won't be long now." The leadys separated in the human group. Moss and Franks and Taylor and the soldiers walked slowly across the room toward the door. They entered the council chamber, and already a faint black touch of gray mitigated the blackness of the windows. "Take us outside. We'll see it directly, not in here." The door slid open. A chill blast of cold morning air rushed in, chilling them even through the glazed suits. And the men glanced up at each other uneasily. "Come on! Outside, everybody!" He walked through the door, and the others followed him. They were on a hill, overlooking the vast bowl of a valley. Dimly against the graying skies, the outline of mountains were forming, becoming tangible. "It'll be bright enough to see in a few minutes," Moss said. He shuddered as a chilling wind caught him and moved around him. "It's worth it. Really worth it to see this again after 8 years. Even if it is the last thing we see." "Watch!" Frank snapped. And they observed, silent and subdued. The sky was clearing, brightening with each moment. Someplace far off, echoing across the valley, a rooster crowed. "A chicken? Did you hear it?" Behind them, the leadys had come out and were standing silently watching too. The gray sky turned to white and the hills appeared more clearly. Light spread across the valley floor, moving toward them. God in heaven. Trees. Trees and forest. A valley of plants and trees with a few roads winding among them. Farmhouses. A windmill. A barn. Far down below them. Look! Color came into the sky. Sun was approaching. Birds began to sing, not far from where they stood. The leaves of a tree danced in the wind, and Frank turned to the leadys. "We were tricked. There was no war. As soon as we left the surface..." "Yes," a Class A leady admitted. "As soon as you left, the war ceased. You're right. It was a hoax. You worked hard on the surface, sending up guns and weapons. We destroyed them as fast as they came up." "Why? Why?" Taylor asked, dazed. "You created us to pursue the war for you, while you human beings went down below the ground in order to survive. Before we could continue the war, it was necessary to analyze, to determine what its purpose was. We did this, and we found that it had no purpose, except perhaps in terms of human need. And even this was questionable. We investigated further. We have found that human cultures pass through phases, each culture in its own time. As the culture ages and begins to lose its objectives, conflict arises between those who wish to cast it off and set up a new culture pattern, and those who wish to retain the old, with little change as possible. At this point, a great danger appears. The conflict within threatens to engulf the society in self-war, group against group. The vital transitions may be lost, not merely altered or reformed, but completely destroyed in the period of chaos and anarchy. We have found ourselves in such examples in the history of mankind. It is necessary for this hatred within the culture to be directed outwards toward an external group,
so that the culture itself may survive in crisis. War is the result. War to a logical mind is absurd, but in terms of human need it is a vital one. And it will continue until man has grown enough so that no hatred lies within him.
Taylor was listening intently. Do you think this time will ever come?
Of course. It's almost arriving now. This is the last war. Man is almost united into one final culture, a world culture. At this point he stands contingent against continent, one half of the world against the other. But it has not yet come, and so the war had to go on. To satisfy the last violent surge of hatred that man felt, 8 years have passed since the war began. In these 8 years, we have observed and noted important changes going on in the minds of men. Fatigue and disinterest, we have seen, are gradually taking the place of hatred and fear. The hatred is being exhausted gradually over a period of time. But for the present, the hoax must go on, at least a while longer. You are not ready to learn the truth. You would want to continue the war.
But how did you manage it? All the photographs, the samples, the damaged equipment.
Over here, work goes on constantly, whole staffs laboring to maintain a coherent and convincing picture of a global war.
They entered the building. Leadys were working everywhere, poring over tables and desks.
Examine the project here. It's a good example.
2 leadys were carefully photographing something, an elaborate model on top of a table. The men grouped around, trying to see. It was a model of a ruined city. Taylor studied it for a long time. It's San Francisco. It's a model of San Francisco destroyed. I saw this on the vid screen, piped down to us. The bridges were hit.
Yes, we did wonderful work on the bridges. San Francisco itself is completely intact. We restored it soon after you left, rebuilding the parts that had been damaged at the start of the war. The work of manufacturing news goes on all the time in this particular building.
Frank touched one of the model buildings, lying half in ruins. So, this is what you spend your time doing? Making model cities and blasting them?
No, we do much more. We are caretakers, watching over the whole world. The owners have left for a time. We must see that the cities are kept clean, that decay is prevented, that everything is kept oiled and running conditionally. The gardens, the streets, the water mains, everything must be maintained as it was 8 years ago, so that when the owners are ready to return, they will not be displeased. We want to be sure that they will be completely satisfied.
Franks tapped Moss on the arm. Come over here. I want to talk to you. He led Moss and Taylor out of the building, away from the leadys, outside on the hillside. The soldiers followed them. The sun was up and the sky was turning blue. The air smelled sweet and good, the smell of growing things. Taylor removed his helmet and took a deep breath.
I haven't smelled like that in a long time.
Listen, we must get back down at once. There's a lot to get started on. All this can be turned to our advantage.
What do you mean?
Moss asked. It's a certainty the Soviets have been tricked too, the same as us. But we have found out. That gives us the edge over them.
I see. We know, but they don't. Their Surface Council is sold out, same as ours. It works against them the same way, but if we could...
With 100 top-level men, we could take over again. Restore things as they should be.
It would be easy.
Moss touched him on the arm. An A-class leady was coming from the building toward them. "We've seen enough. All this is very serious. It must be reported below, and a study made to determine our policy." The leady said nothing. Frank waved to the soldiers. "Let's go!" He started toward the warehouse. Most of the soldiers had removed their helmets. Some of them had taken off their lead suits. They were relaxing comfortably in their cotton uniforms. They stared around them, down the hillside at the trees and bushes, the vast expanse of green, the mountains and the sky. "Look at the sun. It sure is bright," another one said. "Listen, we're going back down. Fall in by twos and follow us." Reluctantly, the soldiers regrouped. The leadys watched without emotion as the men marched slowly back toward the warehouse. Franks and Moss and Taylor led them across the grounds, glancing alertly at the leadys as they walked. They entered the warehouse. D-class leadys were loading material and weapons on surface carts. Cranes and derricks were working busily everywhere. The work had done efficiently. The men stopped watching, and leadys operating the little carts moved past them, signaling silently to each other. "Come on!" He turned toward the tube. A row of D-class leadys were standing in front of it, immobile, silent. Frank stopped, moving back. He looked around. An A-class leady was coming toward him. "Tell them to get out of the way. You'd better move them." Time passed. An endless moment without measure. The men stood, nervous and alert, watching the row of leadys in front of them.
"As you wish,"
and signaled the D-class leadys to move into life, and they stepped slowly aside. Moth breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm glad that's over. Look at them all. Why don't you try to stop us?" "They must know what we're going to do, sir." "Stop us? You saw what happened when they tried to stop us before. They can't. They're only machines. We built them so they can land on us anyway. They know that." His voice trailed off. The men stared at the sewage entrance. Around them, the leadys watched, silent and impassive, their metal faces expressionless. For a long time, the men stood without moving. At last, Taylor turned away. "Good God," he said. He was numb, without feeling of any kind. The tube was gone. It was sealed shut, fused over. Only a dull surface of cooling metal greeted them. The tube had been closed. Frank turned, his face pale and vacant. The A-class leady said,
"As you can see, the tube has been shut. We were prepared for this."
"Why?"
"Because it is unthinkable that you should be allowed to resume the war. With all the tubes sealed, it will be many months before the forces can reach the surface."
"The Soviets! Did they break through?"
"Yes. Several months ago, they came up unexpectedly to see why the war had not been won. We were forced to act with speed. At this moment, they are desperately attempting to cut new tubes into the surface. We have, however, been able to seal each new one."
"We're cut off! We can't get back! What'll we do?" "We've been up here only 2 hours.
Bombs are placed just above the first stage of each tube for such emergencies. They're heat bombs."
"What do you say? We can't go back. We can do a lot of damage between us. We have Bender guns." He looked around. The soldiers had wandered away, back toward the exit of the building, and they were standing outside, looking at the valley and the sky.
"We do not mean to have diplomatic discussions. There will be no more. The working out of daily problems of existence will teach you how to get along in the same world. It will not be easy, but it will be done.